The first person I'm going to talk about, author William Faulkner, who came to Los Angeles in 1932 to write screenplays. Did you know he wasn't famous for writing screenplays? He was actually famous for being a novelist of Southern Gothic fashion.
No. People don't get famous for that.
Two people
get
did.
Famous doing blow at the Chateau Marmont. That's how I did it. That's how my father did it. That's how my whole clan got famous.
Just doing a line off of the hand that the Rocky statue's presenting.
Instead of Rocky, it was just a mound of sweet Colombian white powder.
They both have their hand out for Coke. Why do you think it was right across the street? So let's set up this scene a little bit, okay?
Southern Belle,
mustached William Faulkner. Hollywood has just introduced sound into their films, which was not a big thing before. And studios were clamoring for new writers because now that talkies were emerging, the characters needed to say stuff. So that had to happen now.
We can't just have room tone for 2 hours.
Writers were being pulled in from all directions. They were getting writers from the publishing world. They brought people in who were known on the Broadway stage. They were bringing in young novelists to come in and start writing these new scripts that they needed for movies, they were just pumping out movies. Between 1932 and 1955, Faulkner accumulated about 4 years in our city as a screenwriter, but he hated Hollywood. He hated the Hollywood system. He hated Los Angeles as a city, and he did not take the work very seriously. It was just the way he made money. What kept him coming back, though, was his inability to make money as a novelist. Although he was writing like some of the best literature there was, he didn't make a lot of money from it. But he was making money from the movies. He was very bitter about this, of course. When you put your, all your attention on one thing and then you have to come and write something for Shirley Temple, it's not that easy.
So he wrote the Animal Crackers song?
Yes, he did. I was really hoping you would start singing it in a Southern accent, but I'm just gonna say yes.
Well, let me. For some reason, I can't think of any other accent than wherever Rod Serling's from.
Yeah, I know.
Moon.
It's 1931. Faulkner's first 5 books, which included the classics The Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying, had an average sale of about like 2,000 copies per title, which is okay. It's not that great. His 6th and latest book, Sanctuary, enjoyed a slightly better run and was received a little bit better than most of his works, which were usually met with like indifference, if not. Some people really admired his work, but not enough. A lot of people were
Suddenly he's my favorite writer. He's just so relatable.
But Sanctuary was written with a different motive than other novels, so we have to backtrack some. In the late 1920s, Faulkner managed well with not bringing any serious income in. He didn't really concern his novels with that, and it kind of shows. It's their works of passion. He did a lot of odd jobs around his hometown, which was Oxford, Mississippi. He was doing like house painting and carpentry, a lot of like handyman work. He was also rum running. off the Gulf Coast.
Did he do rum raisin?
Yeah, he did rum raisin.
rum raisin.
He was also working on shrimp.
Tum tiger.
This just keep
Did
making.
You just say he was working on shrimp?
He was working on a shrimp trawler. He was
like
working
Forrest Gump. Is he the inspiration?
He was the inspiration for Forrest Gump. Yeah, this is the kind of ways that he was making money in the 20s, and it didn't really bother him. He enjoyed it. Like, this was life experience, which was feeding his novels. But in 29, he married a woman named Estelle Franklin, who already had 2 kids, and he needed to be the financial support for everybody. So this is the setting in which Sanctuary was written. Although it was a book that was well respected, it was meant to bring in a profit. By early 1931, Sanctuary gets published, and a fairly large number of people were buying it. That's great and everything. But 6 months after it was published, his publisher, Harrison Smith, went bankrupt, meaning Faulkner received practically nothing from the royalties of his book. Sanctuary was controversial, so it was getting noticed, and people were really curious about it. And of course, Hollywood felt the rumbles that Sanctuary was making because it was controversial. It sold enough for them to know that people were interested enough in the title and his name attached to the title. Faulkner managed to sell the rights to Sanctuary to Paramount, and along with that, he managed to secure himself a job writing the screenplay for it. He met with an agent named Leland Hayward in the autumn of 1931, and in December of that year, Hayward and Sam Marks, who was the head of MGM Studios' story department, agreed that Faulkner would be useful in the lot, so they decided to secure him a contract and send him to Culver City. So now that it was becoming official, Faulkner really didn't like the idea of coming to California. He had agreed to write an original story for Tallulah Bankhead, who I only know from that one episode of I Love Lucy, but that's good enough to know that I like Tallulah Bankhead, but nothing came of that. 1932, he was still counting on the money from the sales of Sanctuary to kind of bail him out of his situation in Hollywood. He thought he'd still get out of the contract. So he purchased a house and some land, but Harrison Smith, who was his publisher, was going into involuntary bankruptcy, and because of that, the $4,000 that was due to Faulkner was not becoming, so Hollywood had to be done. So just imagine being dragged into Hollywood. That's exactly what happened to William Faulkner. It's May of 1932. Faulkner makes his first of many visits to the dreaded Los Angeles, California. He must have left his southern charm at home because by many accounts, Faulkner was seen as just off-putting. Physically, he was a little...
Isn't that the southern charm?
I've never met a lot of people from the South, but I'm going to go to say.
Oh, we've met plenty.
Physically, he was just a little bit over 5 feet. He was a really small guy. He was usually sporting a tweed suit with a pipe in his mouth, clenched between his teeth. He was reserved, borderline rude. A lot of people said his southern drawl presented a problem to people as well because of his low tone, and he had a really thick Mississippian accent. It was really hard to make out what he was saying, and sometimes you'd prefer not to know what he was saying because he was so... Apparently he was mean to some people. The thing about witty people, which he was, is that you can use that wit as a weapon when need be, and Faulkner, upon arrival in California, was like an animal out of his element.
I know exactly what that's like.
He edited it. He said that 40 minutes later. He had to edit that in. He was very off-putting when he first came to California, and he was really aloof. It only got worse. Not worse, but he became more of a recluse. So, like, around people, he was aloof, and he learned to not be aloof. He just stayed away from everybody. Instead of being off-putting at a party, he just, I'm not going to go to the party. Throughout his time in Hollywood, he remained distant, spent a lot of time alone, and was usually drinking heavily, the stuff of legends. So he comes to Hollywood and starts at the very top, MGM. A lot of other people like Nathaniel...
President of MGM.
Give that man the biggest office.
We really need a southern bent.
Other authors like Nathaniel West, who wrote The Day of the Locust, which is about Hollywood. He also read...
Very misleading title, by the way.
Yeah. You were really waiting for the locust to come in.
I thought it was biblical.
Moses isn't in this.
But Homer Simpson is.
Nathaniel West, when he started, he had to scrape at the bottom. He was working at like Republic Studios. Faulkner came right in.
That's in Studio City.
What is Republic Studios?
Republic Studios.
Is it really?
Yeah, I've been there.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about it, please.
Well, they've got these things, they're called sound stages.
Uh-huh.
And they have little garf carts.
Simon and Garfunkel.
Garfunkel's. And they have a parking lot.
Oh, really? Tell me about the parking lot, please.
Oh, Greg. It's the place where dreams go to park.
MGM at the time was creating the films with the most pretensions to culture, and they were also handling the finance as well because, as you know, early 30s, the Depression was running its course, and MGM and Warner Brothers were the only ones that were spared from bankruptcy. That being said, it was still a bad time to come to Hollywood and look for a job. And while indeed he was a famed author, Faulkner's contract with MGM wasn't especially grandiose or even uncommon. He was to make $500 a week for a 6-week trial period. But this was also, as Faulkner would say, more money than he'd ever seen and more money than he thought was in the state of Mississippi.
But how did it sound when he said it? This is more money.
This is more money than I have ever seen.
Golly.
So
Shazam.
Goober.
Just wait till Goober hears about this. Goober Faulkner.
Judy.
Judy. He knew Judy.
He's desperate for money. He has a huge overhead in Mississippi.
I relate to him so much.
He's the Bradbury of his days.
The only thing they had in common was that they wanted money. God, why do we keep doing Rod Serling?
It's fun. Because it's fun.
Can't we do another TV host?
Fun in the sun.
Let's do Pat Sajak now.
Okay. I can't do Pat Sajak.
I don't know.
Wanda Sykes. Do Johnny Carson. I know you can.
Yeah, weird Faulkner.
So he's desperate for money, and he finally finds someone to give him more money than he's ever seen. So of course he quits within a week. He found Hollywood so unsettling, so unnerving that he fled the studio in a panic and spent days wandering the wilds of Death Valley, apparently.
What?
Yeah. He left the Death Valley. The most desolate spot on earth where like the Manson family went to go from being dirty.
They weren't there yet.
They weren't there yet, but they would go. It's not like Death Valley changed. It's not like, oh yeah, no, it's very nice now. No, it's Death Valley.
So he was just wandering
Death Valley.
Like Lawrence of Arabia going through Death Valley?
I haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia. It was kind of like Paris, Texas. I've seen Paris, Texas. He was just wandering with a nice little hat on.
It is a Paris in Texas now?
God damn it. We obviously don't know anything about the South.
Eating po' boys and
oh my god,
muffalados.
Yes. Muffalados. He ended up coming back to the studio within a week, and everything was forgiven. So he's back.
He came back enlightened. He talked to a lizard that told him how to write screenplays.
I'm married to this cactus now.
Here's the word. Final draft. That's all you need.
I wrote 70 pages on the sun.
I wrote it in sand.
We gotta go quick. They sat him through a screening of the kind of films that MGM actually produced, and he fled the room once again in a panic.
He went back to Death Valley.
Supposedly, he left saying, "Jesus Christ, it ain't possible." Supposedly.
That sounds like a good review to me.
Another tale was that Faulkner was sitting through a screener of a film, and he gets up and he asks the projectionist about halfway through to just stop it because he already knows how it ends.
How did he feel about Leo the Lion?
He did imitations of him all day.
Rawr.
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 Rawr. I say rawr.
I say golly rawr.
None of this can go out.
No.
Another story about Faulkner that I read was that he approached Sam Marks, who was the, like I said, the MGM studio department head, or the story department, I mean. And he was asking him if are we the ones making Mickey Mouse? Because I have a lot of ideas for this series. Adorable. I don't know if that's true, cute. But it's very... What would his ideas be? Like, I'm just curious if that's true.
Mickey comes from a long line of plantation owners. They've fallen on hard times, but the South will rise again, said Goofy.
During this time at MGM, he worked on a total of 9 projects, doing everything from patchwork to treatments, and he wrote, I think, one feature-length screenplay. The first was based on a short story of his own called Turnabout, which was later titled Soldier's Pay. It was directed by Howard Hawks, which is really important because Hawks and Faulkner bonded on this and became friends for like the rest of Faulkner's life. Howard Hawks was a powerful ally in all of this, which is really important as well because he would continually bring Faulkner back. People can disregard Faulkner. Faulkner could hate Hollywood, but Hawks was there to bring him back in, which is really good.
He knew where he liked to hide in Death Valley.
I know the rock he's talking about. They were both men of great vision who needed to be in complete control to make their art flourish. And strangely, a weird coincidence, they both had younger brothers who died in freakish plane accidents. So they had that to bond over because I think...
What a fun thing to bond over.
I think a couple of their stories are about air pilots, so you can see them like meshing together well. Soldier's Pay would eventually become a movie called Today We Live, which is starring Joan Crawford. Although the film was an overall smash, Hawks admired the dialogue and action scenes that Faulkner had added in and saw him as a valuable player in Hollywood. So this is what he always kept in mind, which is good because if Faulkner tarnished his reputation, he still had that one thing that he did right for Howard Hawks. So he could always like, remember, I'm not that bad. So it's 1932. Faulkner's father had passed away, so he went back home to Oxford, Mississippi, and he starts to figure out that he can do writing from there, and then over long telephone calls can get some work done from home and doesn't have to be in California. So he would travel to California for here and there, but really he would just stay in Mississippi as long as he could for months at a time. So Howard Hawks, when Today We Live was all wrapped up, said, hey, if you ever need more work, just go ahead and knock on my door. He went ahead and approached MGM about making another thing. So they immediately sent him a paycheck for $600. This was in late 1932. And they
gave him a raise.
They gave him a slight raise, yeah. he done not bad. He done not bad. And they continued to send him $600 a week until the May of 1933, which was a long time. That was several months. He continued to work at home, but he didn't really know what he was getting paid for. He was just turning very little in. It didn't really seem like he was doing anything. And then in May of 1933, he gets a telegram from MGM asking, where are you? And he's like, I'm home. Like, well, you need a report to New Orleans. Go talk to this director Browning. So he says, okay. And he even though from Mississippi to New Orleans is like a train ride, he said apparently takes hours.
It's pronounced Nolans.
Excuse me, Nolans. I'm going to smack your mouth with my hand. They direct him to take a plane to like Memphis and then go to Nolans the long way. And he does this.
It's pronounced Memphis.
As angry as a person he was, as much as he didn't like Hollywood, he took directions very well. And he was very obedient because he wanted to.
He was a Southern gentleman.
He was a Southern gentleman.
And drunk.
He just didn't know better because he was drunk all the time. So he arrives in New Orleans and he... Nolans. He finds this director Browning, who's in a hotel room partying, and he's like, "Oh, hey, I'm here to start writing." He's like, "Oh, go talk to the continuity writer in a couple rooms down." So he goes over there, and he says, "Oh, yeah, we're just writing dialogue, but we're not ready to start yet. We don't really know what's going on. Go talk to Browning. Tell him." So he goes back to Browning, says, "Well, he doesn't really know what he wants me to do." And then Browning's like, "Well, let's go talk to him. Nah, get some sleep. We'll talk about it later." Get some sleep, we'll talk about it later, is a phrase that continually gets said on this 3 weeks of just partying and getting drunk, not really doing anything. And then finally they get a telegram. Browning and Faulkner have been fired by MGM because they've been partying and nothing got done, even though they didn't really have anything to work on. The continuity writer...
Throw him to the lion.
The director Browning was, of course, Todd Browning, director of Freaks and Dracula, which was a big success for Universal Studios, referred to episode 12.
12
or 13.
11.
Monsters and the Nerds That Love Them is the title. Refer to that episode if you want to hear about Todd Browning.
Also, refer to all other episodes to just really get a context of where we're coming from when we talk about Dracula.
I mean, if you know Todd Browning's history, Freaks was the last thing he did. Like, he had so much... Everyone's like, oh, he's the next best thing. He did Freaks, and then they like, take him to Nolans, and then that's it for him.
Send him to Nolans.
Send him to Nolans. Pretty much same thing with Faulkner. Just sort of like, just send him to Nolans.
That's where the old Hollywood saying comes from. Send Faulkner to Nolans.
He thinks he's done, and he's kind of happy about it. He was content. He went to Hollywood to make money, and he did. He was making a good profit. He was able to support his family. In 1934, he comes briefly back to Hollywood to work on Sutter's Gold.
That's a Western.
You're right. You must have seen it. What's it about?
Gold.
Who's gold?
Gold. Fool's gold.
Sutter's Gold.
Yeah, Sutter's a fool.
Yeah, he was to work with Howard Hawks in this, but then the project never went through. So they ended up working on something called The Road to Glory together.
Is that a Western also?
No, it's a war movie. This was in December of 1935. Contracted by freshly merged 20th Century Fox. Just merged, looking for writers, looking for new material, so they brought Faulkner on board. He was going to work for 20th Century Fox on and off for like 2 years, 1935 to 1937. None of his work is really... Okay, 2 of his movies are kind of revered. He didn't had not
Casablanca
that one.
and Citizen Kane were.
It was not that one. So during this period, he began to once again drink very heavily. He got on a 3-week bender with a director named Nunali Johnson. I want to say Nunali Johnson.
What a strange pairing of names.
He set up this big, kind of grandiose red carpet arrival for Faulkner, who showed up, took a flask out, which had tinfoil on top, tried to remove it, cut his finger, was stumbling, dropped the hat. His finger was bleeding beyond the point of sucking the blood, and it was just dribbling out. So
Call Todd Browning.
So he grabbed his hat and was bleeding. He like used his hat as a blood dripper, and then continued to swig half the bottle of whiskey. And then the guy Johnson, the director Johnson, was like, "Let me have some of this. If this is a game we're gonna play, let's do it." So they went on a 3-week bender together. There's also another story.
Bleeding the whole time. You gotta get that checked out.
It was that time of the year.
I say.
There's also another story that he got drunk at a polo match with a borrowed pony, tried to go onto the field, and then he fell off the pony and then passed out. And that's a story that happened.
It was just a pony.
During his time on Road to Glory. While his drinking binges was going on, about a year earlier, around 1936, his pay is cut. He was getting an increase, I guess, for Road to Glory because he was working on Hawks again. It went from $1,000 a week to it's about $750 per week. So he managed to bump himself up and then slowly go back down. Next was working on a movie called Slave Ship. He got credited as story by, but he himself admits that he didn't write the screenplay nor come up with original material. He was at this point just claiming to be a motion picture doctor and come in and just do like what I call patchwork, which is just like, this line could be funny. I'm going to change the dialogue here and there.
Just trying to get into Disney Studios.
Exactly. And I think they added his name because they wanted to distinguish themselves by having great literary titan William Faulkner's name on the screen.
William Faulkner presents Mickey on the Choo Choo.
But a lot of people that watch the movie haven't seen it, but they claim that there's a real Faulkner-esque quality to it. It's a really strange movie about a mutiny on a slave ship starring Mickey Rooney.
Is it really?
Yeah, it is.
The best person to represent the struggle of the Africans, Mickey Rooney.
So after that, his work gets really spotty. He does here and there with Hawks as much as he can, but it's not unreliable, but Hawks isn't working that much. He doesn't need that much room for a screenwriter, so he only brings in Faulkner when he needs it. Faulkner has no confidence in his ability to write screenplays, which is true. I mean, he's able to add a certain quality to this stuff, but like his writing is not going over well when it being said out loud. Like he writes
he's great on the page.
He's great on the page, but trying to say his dialogue out loud, it's getting clunky. So people are just like cross it out and just put something more simple. He's not a simple writer.
Get rid of the accent.
So to have him on your team of screenwriters was nice because overall he would add an element that was nod. I'll get to that in a bit. But like individual full-length screenplays he was not good at. So you can kind of see the distinction between being a great novelist and being a great screenplay writer. Also, he didn't know what a movie was, so it was hard to... So it's 1936. He's still in Hollywood, and he goes between Hollywood and Mississippi a lot. And he completes his novel called Absolbum.
What?
Absolbum. I think I'm saying it right.
You can't be.
Absalom. Absolum. He left California in August of 1937 to go back home because this book was getting revered, and he was hoping it would be the last time he'd ever see California again. Not so fast. Between 1938 and 1942, he published 4 books, which did reasonably well, but not well enough. He was going through money really fast because not only was he the sole support of his family, which was his wife, her 2 kids, and I think they had the kid of their own. He took care of his sickly mother. He took care of his, what the book calls, his inept brother who lived on a ranch. He had to take care of him. And then his younger brother was married, and now Faulkner's taking care of his widow. So he's taking care of all these people plus the house that he lives in. So he's continually asking for advances or just wire me some money from his literary agents. At some point, he had 16 cents in his pocket. He goes months without paying utilities.
That could last you a week back then.
You can buy chips, you could buy a soda, you can take a trolley ride, you can watch a movie.
That sounds so familiar.
End of 1942 was getting really desperate. He had written novels again, and it just... 1942. From 38 to 42, he was writing novels. He wrote 4 of them, but it wasn't doing anything for him, so he has to come back to Hollywood, 1942. But...
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Dragging you in.
Welcome back. Faulkner.
But the 2 movies he works on next are the ones that are like Hollywood classics.
Lord of the Rings
and Dude, Where's My Car? Hawks brings him back to work on To Have and Have Not and The Big Sleep, which is one of my favorite movies. Both of them star Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart.
Va-va-va-voom and hubba hubba hubby.
Ernest Hemingway wrote To Have and Have Not, and Howard Hawks was his friend, and Raymond Chandler wrote The Big Sleep. But the thing about it is no one can really decipher who did what. They say on To Have and Have Not what he added to it. There's a character who keeps saying, was he ever bit by a dead bee? And it's like a sort of signal. If you can answer this question, it means that you're on the in. They say he added that element, and there's a quality that Howard Hawks really liked. The Big Sleep has a scene in it right at the beginning where he and the guy who's about to give him the money to do the investigation on who's trying to blackmail the daughter are in his greenhouse. And everyone keeps talking about this scene and how natural it feels. And a lot of people credit it to Faulkner, but really it was a lot of different writers. And one of the writers was Lee Brackett, who was one of the members of LAFSS, the Los Angeles Science Fiction Society. Look at that, refer to whatever episode that was. The same episode.
The same episode that we couldn't figure out. Still don't know. Stop bringing it up, please. You're making us look the fool.
And she said that when she met him, this was 1942, it was a long time since he first arrived in Hollywood, that he was an almost caricature of Southern gentleman. Like he was so overly polite to her.
So our impressions of him aren't far off. Did he carry mint juleps everywhere he went?
He had to. And he wore that Colonel Sanders suit that I just assumed. There's pictures of him in 1944 in just like shorts, a pipe, sunglasses, and a typewriter sitting in the sun just looking miserable.
That's unsettling.
So funny.
That's very unsettling.
It's very unsettling. So those are the 2 movies that he's credited with. But those are the ones that we still talk about. We don't talk about any of the others that he was involved in.
We all agreed not to.
So he works on 2 more movies. In 1944, he strayed away from Howard Hawks and worked on a movie called The Southerner with Jean Renoir.
Who?
The French at this time really admired Faulkner's work, which was really special. And they really wanted Faulkner to have a hand in this. This might be the one that Faulkner was the most proud of. The last picture he did was with Howard Hawks. This was in 1955. And this time he's going between Mississippi and California a lot. He's drinking a lot. He's stuck in a contract, so a lot of the times they don't want him leaving for that long. So he's just wandering around Beverly Hills. He goes to Musso and Frank sometimes and drinks himself a fool. He would frequent Stanley Rose's bookstore, which was a place where it was kind of, I don't want to say underground, but a lot of writers would end up there. Dashiell Hammett was there stopping bin, and everyone would run into each other there. Anyways, he was just wandering around. He was miserable. 1944 and onward, he starts writing novels again. He attempts to write his big novel called A Fable about Jesus Christ and apostles resurrecting as soldiers in World War I. It might be his worst novel, they say.
Really?
Yeah.
That sounds like it's the only one that sounds interesting to me.
They bring him back. I guess he's still desperate for money for something with Howard Hawks called Land of the Pharaohs. I don't know if it ever made the light of day, but I know Hawks and Faulkner were miserable, and Faulkner's like, I don't know how pharaohs talk. Like, don't bring me aboard for this. He's writing a fable, right? And he wants to get out of his contract, and he doesn't know how. He's contacting agents and stuff like, how are you going to get me out of this? Jack Warner's breathing down my ass. I don't want to go back to California. Well, Random House Publishing heard that he was writing something, and they were very interested in it, so they bought him out of his contract in 1946. So that's pretty much it for Faulkner in Hollywood. In spring of 1955, though, they tried to contact him one more time to do screenwriting work, which he declined. And that was it. He was out of California forever, for good.
Good for him.
Good for him.
He's out. He broke free.
He came in, he got his money, he was miserable, he drank a lot. He made some great stories out here. And I don't mean he wrote them. I mean he was living them. And that's it for Faulkner in California.
Daryl Zanuck is shaking his fist at him as he crosses the state line. You'll be back in movie form. We own your image.
The next time he turned the TV on, Foghorn Leghorn was walking around like, something about this bird.
My Mickey idea.